So, the message title today is Choose Wisely, and I'm just going to tell you a story that kind of sums up everything that I'm going to say. And it's a story about a lady who is living in a basement apartment, and it's dark and dingy and dank. And one day, she turns on the radio and hears a minister who really inspires her. And so she starts to listen regularly. And after a few months, she, even though it's a stretch for her, she gives up the basement apartment and gets an apartment higher up where the light comes in and it's a beautiful place. And one of her friends asks her, "What made you do that?" And she said, I couldn't continue to listen to the message that I was hearing and live the way I was living. And that really sums up what I'm going to say. And the point of it is, when she somehow opened up to new ideas, new beliefs, and a new way of being, she couldn't continue her old behavior patterns, and she needed to move and grow in a different direction. And I think I've said this before. Ernest Holmes, when he did his work, he studied all the great religions to see the threads. And it always is fun for me when I start to prepare a message, and everywhere I turn, everybody's saying the same thing. All the different traditions. I want to do a quote now from Deepak, who's a Hindu. At least he was a practicing Hindu, and he wrote that you and I are essentially infinite choice makers in every moment of our existence. We are in that field of infinite possibilities where we have access to an infinity of choices. And he uses a little bit different language than we might, but we're teaching that each one of us is human and divine, that God is within us. And when we make the choice to team up with that divine piece of us, because Spirit is divine, Spirit is infinite, well, he's divine too, but infinite, that we then have infinite ways and infinite possibilities of being and making choices. And so Lama Surya Das is a Buddhist, and in one of his books he writes, he said, have you ever thought to yourself, I just can't go on like this. I want my life to have more meaning. I want my life to have more purpose. I have to make some changes. I can't live a lie any longer. And he said, when we start to have those thoughts, it's actually a good thing, because it's signaling to us that we're ready to make some spiritual choices, ready to move from the lifestyle that we're in to something that we can choose that'll take us to a better place, that we're ready to leave behind patterns that just aren't working for us. And he said, it's just not giving up. It's not giving up because when we think those thoughts, there's an inner certainty that happens, that there's more that meets the eye, that we need to be open to it. So most of you know Michael Beckwith or have heard of him from Agape. By the way, if you have Bright House on channel 1270 today at 12 o'clock, that's Oprah's channel, Michael Beckwith is going to be on there. There's a new show that Oprah has. I forgot what the name of it is, but today is the first one with Michael Beckwith. And in his book, Spiritual Liberation, he asked the question, what's running me? What's running me? And he answers it too. He said the programs that operate in our mind, in our life, determine what our experience is. And that periodically we need to examine them to see if they might be blocking us from more excellence in our life. So just remember that programs, because I'm going to come back to that program. I'm going to come back to that programs at the end of this message. 1270. Oprah's winning. Isn't that what it is? Oh, thank you. Oh. Well, Oprah's a winner. And this theme carries through in the Bible too. I want to do a couple of Bible quotes. Jesus said, "What shall a man be profited if he shall gain the whole world and forfeit his life?" So what does that mean? It means that if I live by the world standards, if I let myself live by the external world standards and not by the divine standard, which I intuitively know, that what do I gain from doing that? What do I gain? Do I really gain? Do I really have the life I want, if that's where I turn, if that's what I'm looking at? And then in another place, this one probably is a little more famous, Paul once said, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's simply saying we need to change, to let our divinity transcend our humanity. You know, to be born again just means that we move to a higher state of consciousness. That's really what that means, that we improve our consciousness. So Eric Butterworth, who is a Unity minister that I really admire, he said that the phrase, let go and let God, he said everybody knows that phrase, let go and let God. And he said, you know, it's a platitude unless you're really willing to decide to let God take over every area of your life. He said, it's more than saying, well, maybe God can handle this a little better than I can, and if he has any good ideas, I'm willing to consider them. He said, that's not quite making that let go and let God. We really have to make the decision and have to make the choice to let God take over every area of our life. So Wendy Craig Purcell is a Unity minister in San Diego, and she wrote a book called Ask Yourself This. It's a book with a lot of questions that she asks and then talks about some of the answers. And one of the questions that she has is, who are you trying to please? Who are you trying to please? And she introduces it with a story that's humorous, but it really makes the point. And it's a story about a grandfather, a grandson, and their donkey that's traveling from village to village. And the three of them walk into the first village, and the people in the village say to the grandfather, you know, you're not a kid anymore. You're getting up there in years. Why are you walking? You should be riding on the donkey. So he gets up and he starts to ride on the donkey, and they get to the next town, the next village, and the people look at him and they say, how heartless can you be? How cruel. You ride and you let that young boy walk? That's terrible. So he gets off and puts the young boy on. They ride to the next village, and the people at the next village look at this little boy and they say, how disrespectful. You ride and you let your grandfather walk? That's terrible. So they both get on this donkey now, and they're both riding it, and they get to the next town, and the people say, what are you doing? You're killing this animal. He can't take all of this weight. So they get off, and the story ends that the last anybody has seen the grandfather, he was carrying the donkey to the next village. And the point of the story, it's pretty easy to see, is that personal growth is about understanding who you are. For each of us to understand who we are, and it oftentimes means letting go of other people's opinions about who we should be and what we should be doing, because you can't please everybody. And you know that Ricky Nelson song, you can't please everyone, so you better please yourself. And it's not said in a mean or a selfish way, but we each have to live where our heart's telling us to live, and in the manner that our heart's telling us to live. Ernest Holmes, the founder of the Centers for Spiritual Living, once wrote, in the center of your own soul, choose what you want to become and what you want to accomplish. So he's saying, go within and look at who you want to be and what you want to accomplish. And I know most of us know Louise Hay, or of her, and she too is a religious science minister, and she has an affirmation in her book that goes, I see my patterns and I choose to make changes. I see my patterns and I choose to make changes. And so what she's saying is, we decide, we get to decide. And when we choose to make those changes, if we put that affirmation out, that can be a big help for us. And she also has a practice in the book that I really like, so I want to share it with you. She said, think of something in your life that you would like to change? You know, anything that you would like to change. She said, think about it and then go to a mirror and stand in front of the mirror and out loud say, I now realize I have created this condition and I am willing to release the pattern in my consciousness that is responsible for this condition. And she said, do that over with feeling and you'll notice a change in your behavior. So Mark Gaffney is a rabbi who is a wonderful writer, and he too talks about this choosing well and looking at what it is we're choosing. And he said when we live from our own uniqueness, that God is having a you experience. When we live from our own experience, God is having a you experience. In other words, he's saying God is experiencing itself as me or you when we live from our own uniqueness. And then he goes on to say, but God doesn't want you to have a you experience. What he means is God doesn't want me to have an experience of Ed Powers. Okay, God wants me to have my own. And when I was looking at this yesterday, I was thinking if God wanted me to have an Ed Powers experience, he maybe didn't need to create me. He could have created two Ed Powers, you know. But the point being that we live our uniqueness, and when we do that, that's how God experiences itself as us. And God doesn't want us out there living our life as somebody else. That you and I, our role here, our job here, the reason we were here is to unfold and to reveal our true self, to manifest to the world the mystery of our unique self. So another rabbi named Shani Labowitz also talked about this, and she did it in a different way. She said, a cup can hold water. This one has coffee, but a cup can hold water. And she said, if you put a hole in the bottom of the cup, that an immeasurable amount of water can flow in and through the cup. And if you let the water stay in there too long, the water's going to get stale. And she said, our minds work the same way. Our minds work the same way, that an infinite amount of wisdom can flow through an open mind. When we let our mind be open to new ways of being and new ideas. When we cling to old ideas, we plug up our mind. And she said an open mind attracts infinite wisdom. And she's saying that because that means if we're open to new ways of being, that the divine presence of spirit can move in and through our minds and bring with it new ways, that infinite potential that Deepak spoke about at the beginning of this message. And so what we need to do is let go of old perceptions of limitation. Becky and I were driving in the car yesterday, and I hadn't even thought about this till just now, and Becky started talking to me about something that she was doing. She was practicing some tapping. You know, remember we did some tapping here, and she said, and it was really cool because what happened, she was stressing out about something, and as she was doing the tapping, she said, I could feel myself. I could feel the stress leaving my body. And she said, but that's just the first part. The first part is letting the idea that stressed me out go somewhere, and the second part is bringing in a new idea. And that's what Shani Labowitz was talking about. So now listen to this. Greg Lavoie is a writer who wrote a book titled Callings, and he has a new book coming out. And in Callings, he tells about an experiment that he and a college group did on their college psychology professor. They're taking a psychology class, okay? And the professor, when he spoke, paced up and down. He paced from the window to the door, the window to the door. He would pace up and down. And so this whole class got together and they decided to see if they could do something with this. So for this one period, every time the professor paced towards the window, all the kids looked bored. They would start to yawn, they would stretch, they would do things that made it look like they were totally disinterested. And every time he walked towards the door, they made it look like they were really interested. They sat up, they paid attention, and Greg Lavoie said by the end of that class, the professor was practically glued to the door. and he said, now so you could just picture that, right? And so he said, imagine the effect of a lifetime of conditioning. Thousands of messages that we've all been bombarded with, either spoken or unspoken, and now they're in our minds. And so often, they get in there when we're young. I've talked about that before, and they become the authorities in our life. Rather than listening to our own truth, we listen to these messages that we're bombarded, and he's saying, look what we could do in 45 minutes to somebody. Imagine what you could do in a lifetime. And then he spoke about another experiment that a psychologist did. He got a group of people, and they were supposed to be learning a new skill, okay? And he got another group of people that were going to, every time one of the people learning the new skill made a mistake, the people in group 2 shocked them. And each time they made a mistake, the level of the shock went up and up until it was up to 450 volts, okay? Now the truth is, they weren't getting shocked. They were a bunch of actors. But the people doing the shocking did not know that. 60% of them completed the experiment. They never stopped shocking these actors, even though the actors were screaming in agony and begging not to be shocked. 60% of the people completed the experiment, even though they believed it was wrong and their intuition told them not to do it. They did it because they listened to the voice of authority. Isn't that amazing? And it made me wonder how many times in our own life do we not follow our inner voice and metaphorically shock ourselves, by staying in a relationship that's killing us, or a job that we absolutely hate, or you could just fill in the blanks on what that is. So at the beginning, I mentioned that Michael Beckwith asked that question, who runs your life? And he said, the programs that are in your head. So I told this story a couple of years ago, and I think this story that I want to tell you now, first of all, it's true, and for me, it's one of the greatest examples I have ever read of somebody programming themselves and their whole life taking on what they've programmed, and what they programmed was a lie. So this is the story. Jack Kornfield is a Buddhist teacher, and he's a psychologist. And a woman came to him one day that had just come off a really painful divorce. Her husband had left her and her 6-year-old son. And she told Kornfield, that's the story of my life. I have a voice inside my head that tells me I'm unlovable, that I'll always be left, and I'll always be abandoned. She said, that's my life story. My father left our family when I was 3 years old, and he died several years later. And she felt his leaving was her fault. That's the belief that she had, that she was the problem, she was flawed and unlovable. And so after working with her for a while, Jack Kornfield asked her if she would close her eyes and go back with him to the night her father died. And so she agreed to do it. And he said, tell me what's going on. And she said, I'm standing at the top of the staircase, and my parents are having another one of their fights. And my father grabs his suitcase, and without even looking at me, he leaves. And she said it was agonizing for her that he didn't say goodbye to her. He didn't say anything. He just left. And so Cornfield said, what were you thinking in that moment? And she said, I was thinking that I did something wrong, that if I didn't do something wrong, he would have stayed. So they stay in meditation for a while. And then Cornfield asks her if she'll go back to that night, but this time, see if she can get into her dad's head and see the night through his eyes. And so she agrees to do that. And when she gets herself in that space, he says, so how does your body feel? And she says, tight, rigid. I feel like I'm going to explode. I'm terrified. I'm stuck in a marriage that I never wanted. I have a dead-end job. We fight all the time. I'm losing my life. I have to escape. I have to run away to save my life. And so Cornfield then asks her as her father, as you pick up your suitcase, do you know that your daughter is standing at the top of the stairs? And he responds, yes, but I can't look at her. Because if I see the look on her face, I won't be able to leave. I'll stay. I love her so much, but I have to go. I have to get out, or I'll die. And then Cornfield says to her, so who made up the story that you were unlovable? And she said, I did. And he said, is it true? And she said, not really. And the reason this story impacts me so much, her entire life, every relationship that she had with a male was tainted by a lie she inadvertently told herself when she was 3 years old. And then, now, she sees a whole different story. And because she can let go of that lie and take on a new belief, she can hopefully have healthy relationships with men for the rest of her life. And so it just points out to me how what a belief can do, what a belief can do. And if the belief is false, how destructive it could be. But the good news is we always have the power to undo something and redo it in a new and different way. So I want to close with something from a book called How Then Shall We Live? 4 Simple Questions that Reveal the Meaning of Our Lives by somebody named Wayne Muller. And he talks about this attention and what we take in a little bit different way. So I just wanted to share it. He says it's a practice, an exercise that we can do at home. And he says attention is the physical manifestation of love. And he said, if I keep pushing my children away, for instance, even if I absolutely love them and feel joy when I see them and want nothing but the best for them, they're not going to feel that until I turn around and give them my undivided attention. Through my attention, they experience my love. And he goes on to say that attention is the tangible measure of love, that whatever receives our time and attention becomes the center of gravity, the focus of our life. And so then this is the practice. He asks questions. He says, so what is the center of your life? Carefully examine where your attention, where your time goes. Look at your appointment book, he says, as your daily schedule. The things that we do, the meetings we attend, the errands, the responsibility. This is where you dedicate your precious days, hours, and moments. This is what receives your care and attention, and by definition, your love. And he goes on, he said, so do you notice, what do you notice about the people and things that get your attention? Is that what you wish to love? Think about that. The thoughts you're thinking, is that really what you want? Are the people and situations you hope will receive the gift of life and your companionship? Are those the people and situations that you're hanging out with and that you're creating? Are these the places that you would intentionally choose to offer your love? And then he closes, he says, we become what we love. Wherever you are giving your time and attention to, day after day after day, this is the kind of person you will eventually become. Is that what you want? Ask yourself, is that what you want? And if the answer is yes, fabulous. And if it's no, we can make changes. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you for being here, and have a wonderful week.